And now we are immediately back for another hour of podcast. So, we were talking about Jung, and we will continue to talk about him. There is an interesting video about Jung in the internet when he's being interviewed. It's that famous video when the reporter asks him if he believes in God, and then he says, he stops, he pauses, and he says, I know. And this is totally contradictory to all his theory. So he had to step back on this statement. He was very criticized for that at that time. Because, as we said before on the previous podcast, he said that he could only accept things that he can know, that he can understand with his thinking, with his materialistic thinking. And then he says that for God, it was not a matter of believing in God. He said that he believes in God only because he knows God. And there he was contradictory, because you cannot know God with your five senses in the theory of Jung. Because of course you can know the God with your five senses. Just observe the wisdom of nature everywhere. Everything in nature will make you see God in all its wisdom, in all its life, in all its spiritual life. You just have to have a proper level of consciousness. You have to be a rishi, an observer with the proper level of consciousness to see God in nature too. But in the same video, Jung comments about the beginning of his studies, where he made a thesis and his professor said he had committed a fraud because the thesis was so impressive, so good, that he could have never done it. So he had stolen it from someone else, and that the teacher would prove that he had stolen that thesis from someone else. And he made that statement in front of all the other students in that class. And then Jung says in the video that because of that, with that man, if one day he would meet that man in a dark corner where no one would know what he did, he would kill that man. He knew that he was able to kill that man, and if he had the chance, he would kill that man. And he says that in that different voice. I exaggerated a little bit, just to show you that when Jung talks about the shadow, he's talking about his own shadow. In that small example, if you have eyes to see, you can see everything about his personality and his findings. What Steiner, Rudolf Steiner in Antroposophy says about this shadow is that every human being is capable of any crime ever committed in mankind and that will ever be committed by mankind. Every crime is possible for every human being when that shadow takes the place of the I, takes the place of our being, takes the place of our real self, of our higher self, takes the place of our superego. the outer ego manifests, the shadow manifests, and this shadow is a terrible being. Another thing that Jung says in that same video is how he was mean when he was fighting with other guys in the agricultural landscape where he has grown up. And when I talk to different psychologists about that, they will all agree with me that both Freud and Jung were talking only about themselves. That is known, but not with that perspective that spiritual sciences can give us. So I believe there are many, many other episodes in Jung's life and in his writings that will show us that when he talks about the shadow, he was talking about something in himself, and he knew how terrible this being can be. Another important thing is what was spread and is repeated by people all over the world, is that life starts at the 40s. This is a perception of psychology, but the explanation for that, the deep explanation for that, can only come to us from anthroposophy, that says this shadow is a real spiritual being living as an intruder in our soul. He is an alien, just a joke, in our soul. It's a good joke though, because I'll make a parenthesis here. Whenever you see a gray, which is that extraterrestrial being with a big head, whenever you see, how do they call it? A reptilian being, which people also consider to be an alien. And that is a third form. I think it's the white ones, they call it, as aliens. None of those are aliens. This is just a special manifestation of our shadow, this intruder being that lives in our soul. For different reasons, in different moments, they can have enough energy to manifest in an etheric body, as if it were a physical body to us. So this is how complex this knowledge about the shadow is. Shadow can even manifest physically and be confused with aliens. So spiritual knowledge can help us by the understanding of the human being, can help us to understand everything about our reality, all manifestations. This is why the podcast says from illusion to reality. We can know everything for what it really is, and not by an illusionary perspective when we recur to spiritual knowledge, to spiritual sciences to explain that. So this shadow, I'll make a pause here and we can cut that when we are editing the video. So, before this parenthesis, where we were talking about life starts at the 40s, and that anthroposophy will help us understand that this is a very big misunderstanding. What is behind that is the fact that in our biography, which is divided in periods of 7 years, which is called setennials or setennials, 1 to 7, 7 to 14, 14 to 21, 21 to 28, then 35, 42, 49, 56, 63, and 70. In the setennial that goes from 35 to 42, we have our 40-year anniversary. And what Antroposophy reveals us is that on that 40-year anniversary, and you know, sometime before that could start at 39, could start at 41, and could manifest longer than that. At that 40 year in our biography, the shadow manifests with its biggest strength, okay? So that's when people divorce, that's when people change sexes, that's when people decide to be dishonest, to rob someone, to rob a partner, to make frauds, to go deeper into drugs, ayahuasca today, for instance, magic mushrooms, everything that is negative in our personality will manifest. But why is it correlated with saying that life starts at 40? It's because that shadow side of our personality, that shadow being, is very much intelligent, is very much strong when it comes to everything related to the material world. So if you want power, money, fame, glory, everything this shadow being can help you get, but at a very high cost. You're creating a very destructive karma to yourself, and you will have to pay in the future. But the action of this being can be very well observed, and it's very strong on the 40s. You become very egoistical, and when you are egoistical, you have a lot of pleasure coming from achieving all your egoistical goals, all your egoistical desires. It makes you feel very powerful. And in fact, it's power that you get. Antroposophy says that the Christ being has shared his power with a being called Ahriman, which in the Bible is called Satan. And in our soul, the manifestation of this being is a manifestation of the shadow that we have. Christ has also shared his wisdom, his knowledge with Lucifer. And this makes us very intelligent, because one comes, the other comes too. They are in opposition, but they are together. One brings energy to the other brings energy back to the other one, and they, in that way, they try to push away from us the Christ who would be in the middle, putting them in the right place for us to dominate those forces and not be dominated by them. So you have on one side power, on the other side you have intelligence, and that intelligence turned into a materialistic intelligence will give you power over the materialistic world. So you would be able to manipulate anyone with your shadow. You would be able to tell lies and lie after lie, and in such an organized way, in such a logical way, in such a dialectical way, that no one will be able to say that you're telling a lie. So this being is the being of lies. And this is what lies, just to make a joke, lie and lies. This is what exists in our consciousness, and that becomes very strong when we are 40. So Jung has seen all that because it was a strong part of him. And because he was influenced by this being of lies, this being of falsehood, which is very, very powerful, very, very intelligent. He has created a theory that seems very powerful, that seems very intelligent, but it's a total denial of the spiritual reality, and it leads us to the opposite way of where we should go, we should be going. Of course, the divine providence and the good spiritual beings of the hierarchies that work for the Trinity, no, they will use everything in our favor. So most of the Jungian psychologists today, they don't follow all that crap from Jung. They accept other things, and they add other things to their practice, to their knowledge, to their worldview, to their vision of the word. And therefore, they will not harm people as much as they would if they would be using Freud's theory in its totality, and only Freud's theory in its totality, or Jung's theory in its totality and only Jung's theory. They are more like this or they are more like that. You know, if they were only that, they would only cause damage, which is, by the way, something that happens in the courts today. Our legal system will only accept those theories structured by Freud and Jung, and some others that will orbitate around it, but that will only consider the material reality. So if you are on a court case where someone possessed by demons has attacked you, or someone whose personality was changed was dissociated, and the dissociated personality would manifest this shadow being, this terrible and very intelligent shadow being attacking you or against you, it's most likely that if you say that anything spiritual, it's most likely, no, it's a sure thing. If you mention anything spiritual in a lawsuit, in a legal case, you who might be having clairvoyant visions, who might be using the highest knowledge in the world, which is the knowledge of spiritual science, would be considered, because of the fault of Jung, someone who would be having a delirium, so a person who is delirious, and you would probably lose in the courts all the rights that you have. So this distortion of Freud and Jung in certain areas of life, they will yield terrible consequences, which is the same thing that we can see with all this agenda from the left wing in our political world, in our democratic world. The left, by definition, do not believe in God. Everything comes from Karl Marx and Engels, and they totally denied the existence of God. So for these left-winded people, there is no evolution in place. There is no karma. There is no gain on having a karma of being born poor, for instance, which is a karma of someone who would go through suffering, as in opposition of being born rich, famous, and with power, which is the karma of someone who would experience egotism as its higher level. The ones who suffer, they clean their karma. The ones who have everything, they just create a terrible karma for them. So they don't have a perspective that everything is karma. They don't know the laws of karma and the laws of reincarnation. And therefore, they create concepts that are concepts that I want my rights now, and I want my rights for me as a minority. So on one side you have feminism, on the other side you would have the chauvinism, you would have communism, capitalism. All these isms are just created by spiritual influence. In that case, is Lucifer. Lucifer is the one who divides everything, who separates everything, who makes the rupture in everything. And he causes that to rule. The real benefactor, the one who really benefits from the saying divide and rule is a spiritual being called Lucifer. He divides everything to rule. He creates conflict, and by creating conflict, he rules. Because the other being, who is the good being, is the Christ and the Holy Spirit. And what they do, they harmonize and they create peace everywhere. So there you see the opposition of these beings. So, because of this materialistic view of the left-winged, could be left-winged too, because they are moved by spirits, and spirits are represented by wind, good or bad. So, this agenda will add one thing on the top of the other, coming from the basic mistake, which is the base of all diseases, which is not to identify with God, but to identify with our ego, the pragyaparad. All diseases start with the lack of faith. This creates a social disease, and that's a very real image. Marxism, socialism, communism is a very, an enormous social disease, and can be considered as one of the first manifestations of social diseases. And from there, many other social diseases will add up one to the other. All this nonsense that's now being changed, thank God, of gender, all the liberalization of the use of drugs, or even the recommendation of the use of drugs, the incentive for the use of drugs. Drugs just dissociate personality and makes everyone more manipulated. Sex, sex is one of the worst things in terms of creating bad karma. And all this liberalism with sex is just creating dissociation of personality, which is the first and the highest level of psychological diseases. Top down, we can analyze all psychological disease, and we will do that in these podcasts about this subject. Comes from the dissociation of personality. So everything is incentivized in our society by these thoughts that are created one after the other by the manifestation of our shadow. And it's done in a very intelligent, intellectual way, so that it will convince lots of people who are just sleeping in their real consciousness. Because what they have more and more is their shadow manifesting through them, instead of their real high divine consciousness, real high divine being manifesting through them. Let's close this parenthesis here and let's move on. So, the contribution of Jung was about the shadow. And what is the contribution of Viktor Frankl? He had Freud as his mentor, as Jung also had Freud as his mentor. By the way, Jung had one good contribution. He ended his relationship with Freud because he disagreed with Freud using drugs to access the spiritual realms. And in one thing he was sure, when you use drugs to access the spiritual realm, you can only have delirious results. And Freud's theory is all about a delirious theory, if you think like that, under the Jung theory, Jung psychology perspective. And Jung was very much afraid of using drugs because he knew that when he used drugs, or when anyone uses drugs, he will just make his shadow much, much more strong. And this matches with the agenda of the left wing. Dissociate personality, emphasize the shadow of everyone to be much stronger in their personality, and then you can do anything. You can do all that the Americans have done with the USAID now, and everything with all the bureaucracy, all the corruption in all governments, and in that specific case, in the federal government of the US. Everything is done by the manifestation of this being, which is totally related with spiritual possession. So all the human beings who do any bad thinking, bad feeling, or bad action, or they are just in a way influenced or possessed by spiritual beings. One of them, and one of the strongest ones, being their own shadow personality that at some points can take complete or total control over the persons. We will add much more to that later, but let's move to Viktor Frankl first. He had a very misfortune in his life because he was arrested and he was a prisoner at Dachau and another concentration camp during Second World War. And there he realized that Freud's theory was totally wrong, in the sense that Freud said, if a human being is pushed to his limits under torture, under losing all his affection, or losing all the relationships where affection takes place, losing his family, losing his job, losing his ground. This is what happened with everyone on the concentration camps. When he loses all the basic needs of a human being, of a human ego, he would turn into a monster. He would give room to his id to totally take over and control him. Or, in other words, he would lead his alter ego or his shadow, take total control of his personality and become a monster. He would lose all his morality. He would lose all his values. That's what Freud's theory says, and it could only come from a very sick mind that did all that he did with drugs to search in the spiritual world, or to try to search in the spiritual world. His observer, his Heishi, was totally contaminated by a very low level of consciousness, which is the low level of consciousness is first of the elemental being, which is a type of a demon that will take the consciousness of anyone who uses drugs. instead of perceiving reality through our own self as the Rishi, as the observer in us, the lens we put, the glasses we put, are the glasses of a demon, an elemental demon, spiritual being, elemental spiritual being, that is a demon, that will be the lens by which we see the world. This is what Freud did. And this comes to the extremes for us to understand when, in his theory, he assumes that this turning into a monster will happen. What Viktor Frankl observed was the opposite, is that there is something in the human being, and this for him was the action of the superego in terms of Freud's terminology. He saw that when the human being is pushed to a situation like this, he has a choice. And the choice is that the bigger the evil that manifests, the higher the good that can manifest. There is a book in Antroposophy called The Occult Meaning of Forgiveness, written by Sergei Prokofiev, which was for many years president of the anthroposophical movement in the world. He died already, very young, at 60 years old. In that book, Prokofiev mentions a man that was in the concentration camps, and when he was arrested, he saw the Nazis killing all his family. And the moment he saw his wife and children being killed by the Nazis, he had what today is called not an epiphany. People use even a higher term today. But he had a spiritual moment. And instantaneously, at the glance, he saw that at his moment he should make a decision. That he could only go to one extreme, to hate all mankind, to hate everyone and everything, or to love everyone and everything. When you push it to an extreme like this, you don't have other choices. It's really just these two choices. And he decided to love everyone and to be good to everyone for the rest of his life. And this is also what Viktor Frankl found out on the concentration camps. That instead of turning into monsters, many people kept there that lived that monstrous, demonic reality, demonic experience. They have decided to love everyone and to be good to everyone. And by that he proved Freud was completely wrong. So when the extreme situation really happened, a manifestation of higher spiritual beings have helped human beings to take that path. You can only be bad and hate if your shadow or other demonic spiritual beings take over your personality, take over your thinking, your feeling, and your willing. And take over your personality. And you can only be good. You can only love if higher spiritual beings manifest on your personality. But in that case, they don't take over. They don't attack you. They don't assault you to take all these forces of your soul and of your personality. In the case of high spiritual beings that can help you, the Holy Trinity, the beings of the Holy Trinity, and the 9 hierarchies that support their action in the universe. For them to act, you have to make a decision. When you make a decision, you're asking them to come into yourself, to come into your soul, and manifest into your soul and to transform you. You ask them not to let you become a monster. You don't want to become the same monster that manifests through the persons that are doing evil for you. You don't want to become the same monster as a Nazi was a monster. You decide to be different. And when you decide to be different, you're asking for the help of God in all those manifestations. And then when you ask for God, God will come. You ask and you shall be given. You knock and the door will open. All these sayings in the Bible are absolutely true. And then what you get is your spirit gets stronger, and it manifests in your soul. And what it will create? First, it will create faith. All your thinking will turn into faith. The opposition to that is thinking that would fall in its vibration, and it will turn into doubt, confusion, materialistic thinking, superficial thinking, empty thinking. This is the downside when your shadow takes over. When the Christ in you takes over, when the higher self in you takes over, when the Holy Spirit in you takes over, when Sophia, the cosmic wisdom in you takes over, when Saint Michael in you takes over, they only take over because you ask it. It's not about possession, it's about communion with human beings. That's why in the Christian cults we do the communion, the bread and the wine. That's part of the communion, the connection with human beings. And this is what can make you act different, the way Viktor Frankl has seen. And then he has created a full, very different theory in order to work that good side of man as part of his psychological development. And in that, he couldn't talk about God. I'm sure that he would love to talk about God. He would love to say it in the way that I'm saying. But he was dependent on his bread to feed him, his wife, his children. I don't know if he created a new family. But in order to survive in this world, he needed to be a psychologist. And if as a psychologist he had created a theory that's only talking about God the way I did, he wouldn't be respected as a psychologist. And then he wouldn't have money, he wouldn't have bread on his table, food on his table, money to survive. So this is the distortion we have today in all branches of knowledge. You have to adapt to the framework of materialistic science. Otherwise, you cannot make a career in a university, or you cannot make a career using any of those sciences. And therefore, thereafter you perpetuate all this nonsense, which is materialistic thinking. Universities in the past have started together with the church. You had to swear by the dogmas of the Catholic Church in order to be accepted in any university. And it fast turned that you had to swear to the dogmas of materialistical thinking in order to enter now or to make a career in any university. You're just swearing to different dogmas, religious dogmas which are untruthful, and materialistic dogmas, which is the materialistic science, which is also untruthful. So, anyway, Viktor Frankl was a need of our times. He has brought a new impulse to psychology that is kind of a redemption of all the crap done by Freud and Jung with their vision, with their fully materialistic vision and distorted vision by their own selves. Why did Viktor Frankl could do what he did? Because he himself, after being at the concentration camps, he could find in him that same strength, that same manifestation that he saw in others. His observer, his rishi, his vision of the world, his perspective of the world came through a new lens, the lens of someone who had gone through a tremendous suffering and then had made the choice to love and to be good. Only because he had that in himself is that he could see that and then bring that as a psychology theory. Okay, my friends, now we're going to move to a much deeper level of reality. Sometimes I say in this podcast that you have to make a choice whether you're going to take the blue pill or the red pill, like in the movie Matrix. If you take the red pill, you're going to know everything outside the matrix. You go from illusion to reality. Asatoma sat gamaya, tamasoma jyotir gamaya, mrityorgama amritam gamaya, which means from untruth to truth. From shadow to light. And from death to immortality. This is one way to translate it. This song is a song that's played in the end of, I'm not sure if in one of the Matrix movies, the first one, or in all the three of them. But that's what it means, and it's very appropriate to have it there. So what I'm going to share with you now is about the other beings that live in the human soul. And what I'm going to share with you now is the power of these beings that live in the human soul. Sorry, I have to go back one step. When I was talking that you turn thinking into faith as forces of the soul, I should also have said that in the feeling level, you will change hate into love. This is also what Viktor Frankl did. And this person mentioned in the book that I mentioned, the occult meaning of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a force that is so much evolutionary you can't believe. This is what this book is all about. And it gives so many examples, so many perspectives of that. And it's because forgiveness changes that. It will change thinking into faith. You can only forgive if you have full spiritual knowledge of the laws of reincarnation and karma. If you have full spiritual knowledge of what manifests in the spiritual soul. You can only forgive a person if you know that she was possessed, he or she were possessed when they did any bad for you. It's not bad, is not something inherent to the human being. The human being is there, want to fight to connect with the good or to be taken by the bad. And when we fall, we're taken by the bad. So if you know that in very depth, and in many different perspectives, then you can forgive. And then your feeling can change from hate. You will love your enemy. Hate will turn into love. Your hate will turn into love for your enemy. This is the highest commandment or spiritual law given by the Christ himself. We don't talk much about that because our materialistic mind cannot even conceive it. How can I love my enemy? So we only stay with love your neighbor as you love yourself. But the highest teaching of the Christ is love your enemy. And you can only love your enemy. You can only love your enemy if you know that you could only grow and make an option for good, make a decision to love and to be good in the most extreme situations of your life. And then your enemy is the stair you have used to go from your lowest level of consciousness, the lowest level of manifestation of your being, to the highest level of consciousness and to the highest level of manifestation of your own being. You could only be good and love because you had freedom to choose between good and evil. And that freedom opportunity only arises in your existence, in your evolutionary process, because something very bad was there and you have decided to be different from the bad. When you were attacked and the monster tried to destroy you, demonic beings tried to destroy everything that you are, destroy your being, destroy your I am, destroy your spirit, destroy your soul, kill your soul. You have made the choice to be good and to love. And when you recognize that for you to go up and develop, someone had to go down and go backwards on their evolution and pay a very high price for that. You can only love that who had manifested as your enemy. And by loving your enemy, you will put yourself at service to all high spiritual beings, at service to the Christ that is the King of all that, the highest manifestation of all spiritual beings. You will put yourself at the service of this being in order to rescue, to redeem and to bring back to the normal course of evolution all beings that have fallen on their existence. There are falling angels, falling archangels, falling archai, and all ranks of fallen beings, fallen elemental beings, and fallen human beings that are on the path of becoming evil beings, that manifest a monstrous personality, that manifest all the falsehood, all the lie, all the egoistic mistakes and manifestations of egoistic means. All of that you can forgive when you understand that in the plan of evolution there is always this polarity of good and evil, and for good to develop, evil had to exist. And then the third force of your soul that you can change is your willpower, the will in your soul. When you're taken by demons, your will turns into fear. Instead of being able to do things, you are paralyzed. And when you are paralyzed, you also give yourself to demonic possession. You know, in order to be strong when you're being attacked by demons, you decide to be a demon to be strong. And when you're strong, you're comfortable again. You decide to hate in order to have energy to motivate everything you do, because you couldn't take it anymore. And you want to be strong. Those energies, they move in the soul. And the strongest hate that the human being can manifest will manifest the strongest fear that any human being can manifest. And hate and fear in this very high level will make you give up and decide to become a monster, because then you don't have fear anymore. You're on the side of everyone who is attacking. You're on the side of everyone who's controlling the world. This world is controlled by the prince of this world, the archonte of this world. This is said in the Bible, and every tradition brings that. So you want to be a materialistic being, a materialistic demon, supported by all materialistic environment, materialistic thinking, materialistic structures, materialistic corporations, materialistic structure of the state, materialistic everything. And then you forgive all your virtues, all your morality, all your ethics, just to be strong and don't fear anymore, because you cannot stand the fear. You cannot stand the suffering anymore. Psychological suffering is much worse than physical suffering. And the spiritual suffering is the highest type of suffering. It's unbearable. When you're facing spiritual suffering, you only turn into a demon or you turn into an angel. You take the path to become a demon or you take the path to become an angel. This is the choice of the human beings. So you can, when you decide to go to the level of the hierarchies, which start with the angels, then you will turn that force of fear into hope. Hope is the hardest one to understand. It's easy to understand. It's easier to understand faith. It's easier to understand love, because faith is on the consciousness level or thinking. Love is on our subconscious level. Everything that's subconscious is related to love as a good side and emotions as hate on the other side. So, conscious and subconscious. Subconscious, the word says, I have some access to that. I have a slight access to my feelings, I don't understand them completely, but I know that they are there. I see them, I perceive them, I sense them, balances, imbalances, good or bad. But when it comes to hope, hope is totally on our unconscious level. Our will is completely unconscious. And our will is what fully determines. Almost everything in our life is determined by our unconscious. That's where our karma stands. And our inclinations, our motivations, everything is there. So you turn your will into hope. But it's hard to understand that. What does it mean deeply to turn the will into hope, as opposition of turning it into fear? You don't fear anything. When you develop a strong hope, an objective hope, when you know that you don't know, it's just on the level of hope. When you have that hope that one day all the evil that has manifested in your life or in the world or anywhere in the universe or in the life of anyone you love, all evil that has manifested has a purpose. And one day it will turn into good. There will be a revelation that beneath all the evil and all the bad manifestations, there was a higher intelligence working that will turn that evil from a manifestation of obstacles, of problems, of suffering, of destruction, into some evolutionary manifestation. In the end, the good will always win. That's the hope we're talking about. You have to have that as the stronger soul print instead of fingerprint, right? Soul print that you have, that in the end, the good will always triumph. In the end, the good will always win. And that has to be on the basis of everything that you are. It has to be unconscious and manifest everywhere on the unconscious level, which it's the most powerful. Influence in the subconscious level and influence in the consciousness level, the conscious level too. That hope is the strongest power. That's why, that book of Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian writer, was so famous, with only one phrase: the universe conspirates at your favor. You have to have that, O universo conspira a seu favor. The divine providence is always taking care of you and of everything, even though you're not conscious of that, because the divine consciousness deals with karma and rules over karma. And karma is all on the unconscious level. Unless you become an initiate and you start accessing contents properly, not through drugs, but through spiritual knowledge, spiritual practices, spiritual guidance, and spiritual conquers on your evolution, accomplishments on your evolution. Then you start in a positive way to be able to access subconscious levels of yourself and unconscious levels of yourself. So, with that, we finish the second podcast about this theme. And in the next episode, I will still close part of this parenthesis here, or this final impulse about good and evil, in the view of one of the very ancient traditions of mankind, which are related to this manifestation of the highest good related to the highest evil. For the highest good to manifest, the highest evil has to manifest. I'm talking about the Manichaean stream of development of mankind. In the next episode, we will start with that, and then we will move to the manifestation of many different spiritual beings in our soul, and where we have that registered along our history in different civilizations, in different periods of evolution of mankind, and which is the strength of those beings now, starting with the strength of the shadow in our personality. But it will stay in the beginning. This will come in the beginning of the next episode. Thank you very much. Namaste.